I'm so happy that I can share this latest episode of the Lesbian Romantic podcast with you today. And that is thanks to the help of fellow romantics around the world who have given back and have contributed to the existence of this podcast with their generous financial support. So thank you to everyone who has helped to make this episode possible. Thanks to you, everyone can listen to it on this free feed. Welcome to the Lesbian Romantic podcast. This is Connection Revealed, Part 40. September 24th, 2063. Fire Blue Territory, North American Province, 5:05 a.m. local time. Come with me, Louise said, suddenly looking very determined. Michelle frowned. What? She wiped the tears from her cheeks, her hands trembling. Come with me, Louise repeated, rising from the chair. Michelle didn't have the strength to get up from the floor. She found herself staring at Louise's shoes for a long moment. Wait, where are you taking us? Jade's worried voice echoed through the room. Michelle looked up in surprise. She had forgotten about Jade for a moment and instantly felt shame about it. What is that? Louise asked. She walked over to the corner and flicked on the overhead light just as Michelle had gotten to her feet. She flinched, her tired eyes struggling to adapt. Calculations, Jade replied impatiently. Where are we going? Her voice was hoarse, and Michelle could tell she was struggling to process everything she had just heard. If only she could tell Jade that she was sorry. Why did you come here? Louise asked. To rebel territory. We didn't, Michelle spoke up, wiping away the final tears. We never intended to. Louise turned to face her again. With more light, Michelle now noticed that she had aged in the last few years, but in a good way. The deep, fine lines around her eyes proved that Louise smiled a lot. Michelle liked those lines better than the ones around her mouth she had started seeing in the mirror. We were downloading data from our power plants, Michelle continued to explain, joining Louise by the wall. That's why we were so close to the border. But then the network went down and we stayed in position because I thought we were under attack. Michelle didn't miss the flicker of recognition in Louise's eyes. She tilted her head. What? She asked. Louise shook her head slowly. Nothing. But she sounded hesitant. After all these years, Michelle could still read her like an open book. You know something, Michelle said carefully. Even if I do, it's not like I'll share, Louise huffed. She pointed at the wall again. What are these calculations then? Jade glanced in Michelle's direction. She was clearly hesitant to talk to Louise. Michelle nodded, indicating Jade should explain. Jade rolled her eyes, but then turned to Louise. Your president sent me here to discuss these with your scientists, Jade explained. I think you might be facing the same issues as we are. Louise looked confused. Elle said you could talk to our scientists? Yes. I explained everything to her and she let me use this space to analyze my data. Jade continued. I'm waiting to talk to your scientists now so I can share my findings. For a moment, Louise tilted her head. Michelle immediately knew that Louise was putting something together in her mind again. This time she didn't have to ask. You were the one in Elle's office in the middle of the night, Louise stated. Jade looked surprised. And you were at the door that night, she said after a moment. Her eyes flicked from Louise to Michelle and back. I guess that makes sense. She's your partner, isn't she? Louise's lip twitched. A new pain burned in her eyes. Can you get the scientists in here early? Michelle asked, deliberately changing the topic so Louise could catch her breath. She didn't want to push Louise away. Yes, the more time I have with them, the better, Jade said slowly, anger clear in her voice. Michelle knew who Jade was angry with. Her web of lies about Louise, Eleanor Lucas, and her own actions, it all had crumbled. Maybe, Louise said. She looked at the floor, then headed for the door. Give me a moment. Michelle and Jade looked at each other as Louise opened the door. Michelle smiled, but Jade didn't smile back. Instead, she averted her gaze, her arms crossed. Michelle desperately wanted to say something, to explain herself, but Louise was still too close by, calling out for a guard. As she stared at Jade and heard Louise talk in the background, Michelle realized how alone she was. It was a feeling that started like a tremble in her core, and she quickly tried to push it back down by turning toward Louise and focusing on what was happening. We'll get the scientist now. She arrived early and agreed to talk to Jade, Louise said to Michelle, but I need you to come with me. What for? Michelle asked, but she didn't need to know. She had already decided she wanted to go with Louise. You'll see soon enough, Louise said and walked back into the small office. She addressed Jade now. Don't expect too much. Elle might have listened to you, but many other rebels won't give you the light of day, she said softly. They won't trust you. Jade chuckled bitterly, shaking her head. I only wanted to share. Your batteries might be dying too. And even if they're not, if our power supply goes down, who do you think will blame? Do you think the chaos will stop at your border? I came here to ask for help, but I also wanted to help you. Is that so? Louise asked skeptically. She turned to Michelle. What about you? Michelle's eyes widened as she remembered Ben Garcia hacking and monitoring the rebel network. If Louise found out, she would think Michelle was being insincere. But if she told Louise now, she was essentially choosing the side of the rebels. Was she ready to do that? Don't bother answering that, Louise said. I won't believe you anyway. I thought you rebels were supposed to be more enlightened or something, Jade said bitterly. More in touch with everything without all that technology. But you're just as hateful as we are, only with less screens. Louise huffed at first, but then her jaw softened and she sighed. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But yeah, you're right. She addressed Michelle again. Let's go. Michelle's eyes immediately flicked to Jade. Jade stood frozen in the corner of the room, shoulders slumped, eyes filled with pain. Michelle wished she could say something to comfort her, but the beating of her own heart was too powerful. She hurried after Louise and closed the door behind her. A bit later, Michelle sat in a car, feeling overwhelmed and confused. Seeing the shock and horror in Louise's eyes had affected her more deeply than she could have imagined. And now, she had literally no idea where Louise was taking her. Louise had ordered her to get into this car and refrain from talking. It wasn't hard to keep her mouth shut as they drove away from the compound where Jade had been left behind. Michelle was too flooded by her own emotions, thoughts, and self-loathing. She had told Louise she was sorry earlier, but she now doubted the sincerity of her own words. Had she truly apologized? Had she truly meant it? Was she capable of ever really meaning what she said? Or had she made good use of the moment to seem like a better person than she was? Why had she not told Louise about Ben Garcia having hacked his way into the network? If Louise was right about Michelle's actions proving that Michelle had truly changed, then Michelle was off to a bad start. She was still lying and keeping things from both Jade and Louise. Michelle glanced to her side, taking in Louise as she was driving. Louise drove calmly. Determination seemed etched in her expression now, as if she had let go of something and was focused on what came next. But how was that even possible? Surely Louise had to be incredibly angry with her. Why was she not using every chance she got to punish Michelle? "Please stop looking at me like that," Louise said. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. "Where are we going?" Michelle asked, suddenly overwhelmingly tired. "I asked you not to talk," Louise said softly. "Please." Michelle pursed her lips. She smiled a little as she said, "You started." Louise chuckled and shook her head. "I want to show you some things, okay?" she said finally. Michelle tried to focus back on the road ahead of them. Another car had turned around the corner and was approaching at high speed. Michelle sensed Louise tensing up, increasing her own speed a little. Tilting her head, Michelle thought out loud, "You didn't ask permission, did you?" The other car flew by, and Louise slowed down soon after, blowing out a breath. Michelle caught her checking the rearview mirror a couple of times. "You weren't supposed to take me with you," Michelle said. She smiled slowly. "You're just like your girlfriend." Louise drummed the steering wheel with her fingers, apparently annoyed. "Why is that?" "She didn't tell you?" Michelle asked, surprised. She softened her tone when she saw Louise tense up. "She picked us up from the hospital in person and then left many of the guards behind. She got rid of the last one when she drove over for me to see you." Was all Louise said. "I'm not sure why she agreed to let me see you," Michelle continued. Louise let out another long sigh. Michelle took it to mean that Louise had no idea either. She smiled again and looked at her hands. She briefly reflected on how much she had been stuck in a pod, a car, a cabin, or a hospital room in the last few days. It was like she had barely moved at all, always being stuck somewhere with someone. And it had made everything in her mind shift. Somehow, she had made her way to another world, physically and mentally, by going from one prison to the next. But where was she to go from here? For now, Louise was taking her somewhere. Maybe another room to lock her up in, or maybe even the border from where Michelle would be sent home. But where was home now? Where would she return to? The army base? Even if she was able to lie and bully herself out of trouble, she would have no authority left in the army. And Jade would always know the truth about her. Garcia probably also knew too much now. It did not escape Michelle that she had, in a way, come back full circle. She had done the same thing to Jade as she had done to Louise. The only difference was that this time, the circle had completely destroyed her too. "I have no place to go after this," Michelle said to Louise quietly, unsure why she was even sharing this, but needing to get it off her chest. Louise stared at her for a long moment before directing her attention back to the road. She took a few more seconds before she spoke. "There's always a place. But let me show you some things first." This was part 40 of Connection Revealed. And this was the version without bells and whistles. I still do fully produce the episode with music and sound effects, all the bells and whistles for the members of the Bells and Whistles Theater on Patreon. Patrons also have early access to episodes, part 41, part 42, part 43, and very soon, in a few days, part 44 is available for patrons. So if you are eager to find out what happens next, consider becoming a patron. Not only will you get cool perks, but you will also help keep this free feed alive and kicking for everyone around the world. And that does make a huge difference. And I'm so grateful for all the help from all the fellow romantics around the world. Thank you. Thank you. You know what I'm going to say? Thank you so much for spending time with me. It is always a privilege. Time is a non-renewable resource. And I feel honored that you chose to listen to this episode that I created for you. So thank you. That is all for this episode. I'll see you on Patreon or on this public free feed in 2 weeks.